looking everywhere, that's how the story goes. Grab your gear, hold on tight.
After Chapter 3, The Calm Before the Darkness, the first 3 chapters of our tale have swept us into a world of beauty, passion, and glamour. The maidens of the village, bold, playful, and dangerously enchanting, have filled the nights with song, laughter, and secret love encounters by the river and under the forest skies. We've seen the glow of fire-lit parties, the shimmer of gowns with plunging necklines, the teasing glances between maidens and their admirers, and the blissful denial of a village that believes only in pleasure. Yet, even amid this sparkling tapestry of romance, the first shadows have begun to stir. A glimpse of something unnatural beneath the moon. A whisper in the wind, a sensation that not all is as perfect as it seems. Evelyn Graves, the forgotten maiden buried alive in jealousy, has stirred beneath her cursed grave. Though the circle of maidens still dance in delight, a fate of terror edges ever closer. From here on, the story twists. The passion will remain, but it will be tangled with dread. Friendships will be tested, love will burn brighter, and the seductive horror of Evelyn's return will haunt every smile, every embrace, every shimmering gown under the moon. Don't miss what comes next. Subscribe now to the Zombie Story Zone and journey deeper into this thrilling mix of love, glamour, and horror. Comment your thoughts below. Will the maiden's beauty save them, or will it only draw Evelyn closer? The stage is set. The curse awakens. The story has only begun.
It's a crazy mix. With every twist and turn, we'll learn some new tricks. So grab your frames, let's dive.
Chapter 4, The Forest Picnic. The sun rose over the village with a golden brilliance that seemed almost touched by divinity. The bells of the chapel rang softly in the distance, mingling with the birdsong that filled the skies and the rustle of leaves in the September breeze. Lady Seraphina had been the one to suggest it. A grand picnic in the forest, beyond the winding path where the river Aloria cut through ancient oaks and silver birches. It was not to be a simple gathering with baskets and blankets. No, this was a procession of glamour. Silk gowns were chosen with care, fabrics shimmering in the morning light like the very petals of wildflowers. The village girls, eager to imitate the nobility, wore gowns cut daringly low, lace bodices framing their youth in bold defiance of modesty. The men, tall and strong, wore velvet coats, boots polished to a mirror's shine, and hair tied with satin ribbons. The forest awaited them like a stage set for a performance of love. Its canopy filtered sunlight into golden beams, and the ground was alive with wildflowers, violet, scarlet ivory, and moss soft as velvet. Birds swooped between branches, and the air carried the fragrance of pine needles mixed with honeysuckle. The arrival lady, Seraphina, led the way upon a white stallion, her crimson gown a waterfall of silk against the pale horse's flank. Beside her, Isabella rode a dark mare, sapphire gown catching the light like ocean waves. Cecilia followed in emerald green, her neckline plunging dangerously low, as though daring nature itself to look away. Rose, Mariette, and Eliza rode together, laughter rising like silver bells each time the horses trotted. The men rode close, Adrian with his noble posture beside Seraphina, his hand occasionally brushing hers on the reins. Behind them, 2 handsome soldiers flanked Isabella and Cecilia, exchanging teasing glances with their companions. When they reached a clearing deep within the forest, gasps of delight filled the air. Before them lay a meadow surrounded by towering oaks, with a brook threading through it, glittering in sunlight. The ground was carpeted in buttercups and violets. At its heart, servants had already spread blankets of velvet, laid crystal goblets, golden trays, and silver baskets overflowing with fruits, pastries, roasted meats, and wine. The feast in the wild. The women reclined upon cushions, gowns arranged in waves of color: crimson, sapphire, emerald, lavender, and pale rose. Goblets sparkled in their hands as wine poured freely. Grapes were plucked from vines and pressed playfully against lips. Cherries dangled temptingly before being bitten with white teeth. The men, their shirts loosened, laughed and leaned close, feeding morsels of roasted pheasant, fingers brushing skin in lingering touches. Cecilia, bold as ever, dipped her fingers into a golden bowl of honey and traced a drop across her neckline, letting it slide slowly down her skin before laughing as one of the soldiers leaned to catch it with his lips. Isabella, meanwhile, had drawn her companion into a whispered conversation, their heads bent close, his hand resting upon the curve of her waist, as if unable to help himself. Lady Seraphina, regal yet playful, sipped her wine with Adrian at her side. She allowed his hand to rest over hers, the weight of his admiration written clearly in his eyes. "You risk much, Adrian," she murmured, "to look at me so. And yet, my lady, I would risk all the world for such a gaze in return," he replied, his voice low, almost trembling. Rose and Mariette, the younger maidens, had slipped away toward the brook with Eliza. There, they lifted their skirts high above their knees, splashing one another with the cool water, their laughter echoing through the trees. Their hair, loosened by the breeze, shimmered in golden and chestnut waves, and their gowns clung damply to toned, youthful forms. A pair of young huntsmen followed, pretending to chase them, only to end in playful wrestling at the brook's edge, arms around waists, lips brushing cheeks. Music and dance. No forest gathering would be complete without music. A minstrel had brought a lute, and as the notes drifted across the meadow, the company rose to dance. Seraphina twirled in Adrian's arms, her crimson gown flashing in circles, neckline daring as her head fell back in laughter. Isabella, with sapphire silk shimmering, pressed close to her partner, her eyes dark with mischief, as she whispered things that made him flush crimson. Cecilia, bold emerald silk swirling about her toned legs, danced barefoot, pulling her soldier down with her into the grass until they both fell laughing, lips finding each other amidst wildflowers. Rose and Mariette formed a circle dance with Eliza, the three young maidens spinning with ribbons in their hands, skirts flying. Their beauty was fresh and wild, the innocence of youth mingling with an awakening desire in every step. The huntsmen clapped in rhythm, their eyes following every movement, every curve revealed by the motion of dancing. The waterfall. As the afternoon waned, a suggestion arose, to visit the hidden waterfall deeper in the forest. The company, intoxicated by wine and joy, agreed eagerly. The path wound through mossy stones and arching trees until the sound of rushing water reached their ears. Then it appeared, a cascade tumbling from a height into a clear pool, mist sparkling in sunlight. The pool's surface mirrored the sky, and the air was cool, refreshing, alive. It was here that play turned to abandon. Isabella, daring beyond all, stripped down to her shift and waded into the water, the thin fabric clinging scandalously. Laughter erupted as Cecilia joined her, emerald silk floating about her waist before she tossed it aside and dove headfirst. Soon, Rose, Mariette, and Eliza followed, shrieking as the cold water touched their skin, splashing one another wildly. The men could not resist. Boots and coats were flung aside, and soon the pool was filled with swimming bodies. Laughter, embraces beneath the spray of the falls, and kisses stolen in secret corners where the rocks offered shadows. Lady Seraphina herself entered last, guided by Adrian, her crimson gown soaked and clinging, her figure outlined in every detail, neckline plunging deeper with every ripple. Adrian held her close beneath the falling water, his lips finding hers with desperate hunger. For a moment, the forest itself seemed to sigh with pleasure at the sight, beauty unrestrained, love blooming in reckless abandon, youth gilded with sunlight. The evening glow. As the sun sank lower, the company returned to the meadow, damp and glowing from water and wine. Fires were lit, their flames casting golden halos around faces still flushed with passion. More food was brought forth, pastries dusted with sugar, venison roasted on spits, goblets refilled until the world itself seemed drenched in honey and wine. Cecilia lay stretched upon a blanket, her hair loose over her shoulders, neckline plunging as she whispered to her soldier, his hand wandering freely. Isabella reclined with her head in her lover's lap, sapphire gown open at the front, his fingers tangled in her curls. Rose and Mariette curled together near the fire, their laughter now softer, more intimate, as the huntsman hovered close. Seraphina remained at the heart of it all, radiant and untouchable, Adrian at her side, his gaze never leaving her as if she were the only flame worth burning for. The first sign. The night deepened, and the forest grew quieter. The laughter of the company continued, yet somewhere, beneath the mirth, a strange unease stirred. The brook, once so clear, now carried a faint red tint in its current, though none noticed at first. The crackling of the fire seemed louder than before, the shadows it cast unnaturally sharp. It was Mariette who first paused, her hand tightening on Rose's. "Did you hear that?" she whispered. From the depths of the trees came the faintest sound, like a sigh or perhaps a whisper. Too faint to be sure, too distant to name. The others laughed it off, drunk with wine, but Seraphina felt a chill prickle at the nape of her neck. For the briefest instant, she thought she saw a pale figure between the trees, watching. A woman's face, impossibly beautiful yet twisted in sorrow. When she blinked, the figure was gone. The fires blazed, the wine flowed, the kisses deepened once more. But far beyond the circle of light, Evelyn Graves stirred beneath the earth of her grave. And the forest knew it. Chapter 5. The First Night of Unease. The dawn after the forest picnic rose with a golden calm, as though nature itself wished to erase the memory of the faint whispers in the night. Yet beneath the surface of beauty and routine, an unseen thread of unease began to weave itself into the tapestry of village life. The meadow where the revelry had taken place bore the marks of indulgence. Overturned goblets still glistened with dried wine, fruit scattered across mossy ground, and flowers pressed flat where lovers had embraced. But among these signs of joy, something strange lingered. A faint streak of crimson by the brook, carried away slowly in the current. The servants who cleaned the meadow muttered among themselves, crossing themselves as if to banish some unspoken dread. Morning glamour. In the village square, the nobility gathered as though nothing unusual had occurred. Lady Seraphina appeared first, resplendent in a gown of deep burgundy trimmed with gold. Her auburn hair, bound with pearls, gleamed in the sunlight. Isabella soon joined her, sapphire silk trailing like river water, neckline daring enough to draw every gaze. Cecilia swept in next, bold as ever, her emerald gown cut lower than decency allowed, eyes glittering with mischief. The younger maidens, Rose, Mariette, and Eliza, came hand in hand, laughter as fresh as dew. Their gowns were lighter, pastel pinks and creams, but no less daring in their cut. The men circled them like hawks, Adrian close at Seraphina's side, the soldiers doting on Isabella and Cecilia, the huntsmen still chasing the playful trio. The square itself was alive with color. Banners fluttered from the balconies. Merchants called out with bolts of silk and baskets of ripe figs. Musicians played lutes while children danced. To any stranger, it was paradise. Yet an undercurrent lingered in the eyes of the villagers. Whispers of a shadow seen in the forest, of animals gone missing, of strange prints in the earth near the old graveyard. The Banquet of Roses. That evening, the company gathered again, this time in the great hall of Isabella's family estate. Chandeliers of wrought iron hung from the beams, bearing dozens of candles that glowed like stars. The tables were laden with roasted swans, venison, sugared fruits, and wine that gleamed like rubies in crystal. The women were visions of glamour. Seraphina's burgundy gown clung to her toned figure, neckline plunging into shadows that drew Adrian's eyes with every breath. Isabella, shimmering in sapphire silk, leaned back in her chair as a soldier whispered at her throat, lips brushing the edge of her skin. Cecilia raised a goblet high, her emerald gown slipping lower on her shoulders, daring every man to look. The younger maidens, Rose, Mariette, Eliza, were seated together, cheeks flushed, eyes shining with the memory of the waterfall. One huntsman offered a cherry to Rose, his fingers brushing her lips as she bit it gently. Mariette laughed as her companion tried to feed her sugared almonds, only to miss her lips and scatter them down her neckline. Eliza, quieter but no less radiant, leaned close to a boyish courtier, whispering in his ear until his face burned scarlet. Laughter filled the hall. Music rose, and soon the feast became a dance. Gowns swirled, silks shimmered, bold necklines caught the candlelight in every spin. The air itself seemed intoxicated with beauty and desire. Yet through the windows, the night pressed close. A wind rose from the direction of the graveyard, rattling the shutters, and for a moment, the candles flickered. Seraphina felt it first, a chill upon her skin, like unseen eyes upon her back. She turned toward the window, but there was only darkness. A secret garden encounter. Later, as the banquet waned, couples slipped away into the gardens beyond the hall. Moonlight bathed marble statues of goddesses, roses spilled from trellises in cascades of scarlet, and fountains sang with crystal streams. Seraphina walked arm in arm with Adrian beneath a canopy of roses, their petals brushing against her hair like whispers. He kissed her hand, then her wrist. then the curve of her shoulder where her gown fell daringly low. Her laughter was soft, almost breathless. Isabella had stolen away with her soldier, pressed against the marble base of a statue, his hands tracing the shape of her figure, while she arched toward him with a smile both playful and wicked. Cecilia, bolder still, lay sprawled upon a stone bench, her soldier leaning over her as she tugged his ribbon loose with a laugh. Rose, Mariette, and Eliza ran through the hedges, chased by the huntsmen. Their laughter rang through the night as they darted around corners, skirts flying, hair tumbling loose. When Rose was caught, she was spun in a circle until she fell into the grass, breathless, her huntsman's lips descending upon hers. Mariette, pinned against a hedge, laughed until her laughter was silenced by a kiss. Eliza found herself seated upon the edge of a fountain, her courtier kneeling before her, devotion plain in his eyes. The garden shimmered with moonlight, perfume of roses, and the music of passion. Yet beneath it all, a sound intruded, the faintest scrape, like stone shifting against stone. No one noticed, save Seraphina, who froze in Adrian's arms. "Did you hear that?" she whispered. He paused, listened, but shook his head. "Only the fountain's song, my lady." But Seraphina's gaze drifted toward the distant trees, where the shadows seemed thicker, the darkness deeper. Midnight unrest. When the revelers finally returned indoors, a storm was gathering. Clouds swallowed the moon and thunder growled across the hills. The wind rose, carrying with it a strange smell, earth and rot. The younger maidens slept together in an upper chamber, laughter giving way to dreams as they curled beneath silk sheets. Isabella and Cecilia kept their lovers close, unwilling to let the night's passion end. Seraphina, though, remained wakeful, sitting by her window, her auburn hair unbound, her gown loosened, but her thoughts restless. For as she gazed across the fields, her eyes caught movement near the old graveyard. At first, she thought it a trick of the storm, a branch swaying, a cloak lifted by the wind. But then she saw it clearly, a pale figure, a woman, her gown torn and earth-stained, hair tangled with soil. She walked slowly, as if each step pained her, yet her beauty was undeniable, glowing even in the storm's darkness. Seraphina's heart stilled. She rose, pressing her hand against the glass, breath fogging the pain. The woman lifted her face, and for an instant their eyes met. Evelyn Graves. Her lips parted in a smile that was both sorrowful and cruel, as though she knew a secret no living soul should bear. Then the lightning flashed, and the figure was gone. Dawn of fear. Morning came with a heavy sky, the storm leaving behind a damp chill. The servants whispered of strange things, the cry of wolves though none had been seen for years, hoof prints near the graveyard though no rider had passed, a grave disturbed though no burial had been performed. Seraphina spoke of what she had seen to no one, yet in her heart she knew. The whispers, the chill, the unease, all were threads of the same dark weave. Evelyn Graves had risen, and though the village still danced and feasted, though laughter still filled the air, a shadow now moved among them, unseen yet inevitable. The manor at dusk breathed like a held lyric. Chandeliers scattered a honeyed light across carved oak and silk, and garlands of late roses draped from banister to beam as though the house itself sought to wear the season. Laughter rose in bright, practiced arcs, then softened. A lute spun a memory into melody. The hall smelled of honey and warmed wine, and the faint perfume the women used to make themselves feel like kings of a small world. Mariette arrived as if she were the last, perfect note of the evening. She moved like a thought already formed. In a gown the color of new leaves, silk that floated around her in a gentle tide. The neck opened modestly in the light, but her presence made modesty itself seem scholarly. Her hair was woven with tiny jasper beads that caught the chandelier's blush. When she stepped down the stair, someone, a soldier perhaps, or a servant with a poet's eyes, stopped singing. The conversation folded politely around her like a page cut to fit. Eliza's laugh found her, as it always did, a bright pebble cast into whatever pond she entered. "Late," Eliza teased, arranging Mariette's sash as if it were a coronet. "Do you save your entrance for the exact moment hearts turn listless?" Mariette smiled, and the smile was not of vanity but of living. "Only to give them something to remember," she answered, and set her goblet down where the candles caught the wine like trapped rubies. The ball unfurled in the way these evenings do, in small combustions of joy. Couples drifted into alcoves, voices threaded together as hands found the small courtesies of touch. The women traded confidences and gentle barbs. The men traded stories and heavy, clumsy compliments. Food was summoned in silver pageants. Someone sent a companion to fetch roasted quince dipped in honey. The night felt indulgent and safe, the kind of night that makes one believe in continuance. Mariette's delight was in the small, tender mischiefs. A borrowed glove slipped into a pocket, a whispered jest that undid a partner's reserve, the way she could sit cross-legged on the banquet table and make a grown man forget how to speak. She belonged to no one and to everyone, and that freedom was part of her charm. None of the company suspected how abruptly those bright threads could fray. There is always a moment like that in any long evening. A small hush, a cool leak of air, the world taking a breath before the next song. For some, it was the time to go for water. For others, to refresh a makeup or to laugh more loudly. For Mariette, it was something else. A tug, gentle and private, that called her toward the garden's moonlit hem. She told Eliza, with the careless loyalty of the young, that she would fetch more roses for the wreaths. She stepped out into the night like a leaf stepping off a branch. The garden had been laid out with the pride of a family that believed in beauty as an inheritance. Lawns fell away into shadowed hedgerows. A fountain whispered of old promises. Trimmed yews stood like silent attendants. Above it all, the moon hung clear and round, and thin snow-white clouds paced slowly across it. Lanterns swung in the trees, and lantern light spilled like scattered coins, and the roses, late, fat with perfume, nodded in the cool. Mariette moved among them like someone who knew every secret path by heart. She paused by the fountain and cupped cool water to her lips. Someone somewhere played a soft tune on a distant lute, and the notes fell across the garden like scattered petals. She breathed in the night, rich with green and honey and something else that she could not name, a sweetness like memory and a hollow like longing. She did not notice the hush at first. It was so slight, like the cessation of some far-off wings. Then, from where the yews pressed against the field, a voice took its place within the hush. It was a voice that seemed to be put through a glass, though not less immediate for that, the tone half choral, half broken. It said her name. Mariette? It was not a voice she knew, and yet it wrapped around her as if familiarity had been its native language. It sounded like river stones shifted, like veils dragged across pewter. The skin along her arms prickled, not with fear, but with the exquisite alertness that attends a promise. She thought of the house, thought of the banquet, thought of the candles and the garlands. She thought, very briefly, of the way Eliza sometimes kept the good wine for herself. She thought of the fact that the world had always been warmer than it allowed. Then she turned toward the voice. Between two leaning yews, a figure stood. A woman in a gown ruined and beautiful, white where the moon found it, darker where earth clung to cloth. The dress hung from her body as if it remembered better times. Her hair was long and loose, braided with the forest's hush. Her face, the face Mariette saw, was made of sorrow and of beauty kneaded together. It was like a statue that had learned to weep. Her eyes were the color of cigarette ash. For a second, the world arranged itself around that vision. Mariette, who delighted in the immediate, felt that old, curious tug again. There was no threat in the woman's look. There was only invitation. "Who are you?" Mariette asked, and the woman smiled, an expression that had the patient cruelty of winter sun on a garden. "Someone who loved once," she said softly. "Someone who was taken. Someone who remembers how the heart feels when it has been betrayed." There was a poetry to the voice. It carried with it the sudden sense that grief could be taught as a tender thing. Mariette, with the reckless innocence of those who can still believe counsel given by strangers, took a half step closer. There was time then for Mariette to think of those she loved. A ribbon, perhaps, or Eliza's laugh. A childhood thing, a small kindness. The things that, when the night grows thick, insist upon being the lodestars. Yet the woman in white did not move like a danger. She moved like the explanation of something inevitable. "You are beautiful," the woman murmured without echo or flourish, and Mariette felt herself abbreviate into gratitude. The quick gladness of someone who is seen. It is possible, perhaps inevitable, that one cannot resist another person's hunger for being recognized. Mariette reached out then, and the woman's hand met hers. It was cool, as if the night itself had taken shape beneath skin. Mariette's fingers clasped the coolness, and for an instant, the lanterns behind her bent forward to listen. "Come," the woman said, not quite a command, but a kind of entreaty. The tone held the promise of escape from small humiliations, the way marriage can hollow a heart, the way promises can become ownership. The woman's voice, which Mariette decided she loved even as reason protested, offered, in broken poetry, a different economy. No bargains to keep, no duties to perform. Beauty kept and nourished, rather than bartered or boxed. She was a portrait of yearning, and Mariette, who loved being the center of a soft world, who loved being adored and easily forgave the slights of men, felt the tug answered within her. Beyond the yews, a breeze slid over the garden. A petal drifted onto Mariette's hand. She stepped closer, and the woman's other hand brushed her wrist like a benediction. The cold slid along Mariette's bones, but that cold had a clarity to it rather than a threat, a kind of absolution. She did not see the moment as theft. She saw it instead as acceptance. She stepped past the last hedge as if to cross into some other room of her life. Inside the manor, ladies and gentlemen danced and drew breath, unaware. People there would later insist they had heard nothing, that the night had been seamless, that Mariette's absence was merely a prank, the sort of masquerade mischief familiar to those who do not expect the world to break open. Eliza laughed and told a joke, and someone asked for another glass. The song continued, and the dancers made their small circles. If there were glances cast toward the garden, they were ordinary, polite. No one reached to follow. The bright world kept its rhythm. Mariette did not return. When the hour slid toward morning and the house grew quieter, Eliza noticed the missing warmth at Mariette's place. She called for her in a voice like both a bell and a question. The sound cut into the revelers like a tiny knife. A servant went to find her. Another checked the rooms. The search moved outward with the careful desperation of lovers and friends, through the linen closets, beneath alcoves, into the kitchens where a maid was dozing beside a bowl. At last, they found a scrap. A thin ribbon of green, the very ribbon that had braided through Mariette's hair, snagged upon the ironwork of the old garden gate. It fluttered in the dawn as though trying to wave back at some memory. Blood, or dew, darkened one edge of it, and the servants who found it pressed their palms to the ribbon as if sensing the weather that had claimed their mistress. Denial works in particular ways. Eliza laughed, and then laughed thinner, saying it was a jest, that Mariette had left with some gallant, that she would come back flushed and full of a story. The others wanted to believe. To believe left the world as it had been. To question it was to admit that a seam had split. Grace and gaiety hung then like ornaments over a fissure. Only Adrian, who had a steadiness about him and eyes that had watched more than he had ever said, went down the garden path. He walked as one who follows a sound he cannot name. The gate stood open. The path of white gravel led into the grove beyond. The fountain sat like a small, bright heart. There were no footprints on the grass beyond the gate, save for the bird tracks and the small impressions where someone's skirts had brushed the earth. No sign of a scuffle, no overturned berry basket, no glove dropped like a clue. He walked until the yews closed and the trees seemed to breathe around him. In the hush, he thought he heard a song, thin as a reed's lament. He called her name, Mariette, and the answer was the moon. The moon did not answer. When morning came in, the house shuffled like a body waking with a new ache. People moved in small, jerky ways. Mouths formed apologies where words were wanted. Hands searched for anything to hold. They found the bitten apple in the meadow where Henry had sat the night before. They found the place where the silk had brushed stone and been torn. They found, finally, a small patch of green fabric clutched in the long root of an old thorn tree, spun like a pale flag. Grief arrives with odd gifts. A neighbor's hand on your elbow. A woman bringing tea at noon. A child with a crooked braid. They wrapped Mariette's mantle about themselves the way people wrap themselves around a wound. They prayed in a small, urgent chorus. They whispered of superstition and of wolves, of tramps on the road, of the thin, dangerous things that live at the edges of maps. Rumors began to braid themselves like ivy, some of them like prayers, others like poison. And in the hush of the house that used to be certain of its own pleasures, Eliza stood by the window and watched the shadowed line of trees. Her face was full of a complicated light. For a long while, she said nothing. Then, in a voice that trembled on the edge of tenderness and madness, she whispered, "Forgive me." No one heard what she meant. Not fully. They took her hand and folded it into their circle, thinking relief could be found in the touch of warmth. They dinned the house with the busy rhythms of grief. Talk, tea, a meeting with the constable, a search party. The village swung into motion as if it had decided to right itself by motion alone. Only the ribbon remained certain and mute. It clung to the iron as if refusing to let the world forget the place where some bright thing had been taken. The manor slowly returned to its routines. The musicians came back to play half songs they had always known, and the women set the table with the same clink of china. But the air had shifted so that speech sometimes fell into the wrong place, and laughter was fragile, quick to crack. And in the place where the ewes crowded and the moon kept its private council, the woman in the ruined gown watched and waited. She held her hands as if to gather a small, vanished thing and keep it whole. Her face, in the silver light, looked for all the world like sorrow rendered into art. Her voice, in the hush, was patient and cold and full of what had been stolen, the sense that some bargains once struck in the dark are not undone by mourning. The mourning brought no perfect answer. It brought only the first unsolvable question. A place that had been whole now had an absence shaped like a girl, and no amount of brightness could press the edges back together. The ribbon that clung to the gate fluttered in the breeze. It seemed in that movement to say something like this: that beauty keeps its claims, and that some evenings are gates one cannot walk back through. The circle gathered that evening and sat in a line like a string of pearls laid on velvet. Eliza, pale and watchful, Adrian rigid with a quiet that felt older than his years, Celeste with her hands clasped as if to hold herself together. They pretended to tell one another stories, to hold measure against the new hollowness, but the laughter would not fill the rooms the way it had. Each time the wind came down from the yews, someone's eyes strayed to the garden gate. What would follow them? The memory, the want, the delicate terror of not knowing, would not leave them. The knot had been tied, and each day pulled it tighter. The world of their small pleasures had been made precious only by the knowledge that it could be taken. And underneath it all, like a leaf-playing sound, a voice sometimes said the name of the missing girl, and not in sorrow only, but as if reading a roster of debt. Mariette had gone. The garden remembered her. The gate remembered her ribbon. The woman in the ruined wedding gown kept an unmoving vigil where the shadows kept their secrets. Soon, people would call her a ghost, a revenant, a bride turned hungry for the love she had been denied. They would whisper of bargains, of jealousy, of the price of loveless vows. Others would refuse to believe such things. The village would fracture in its certainties. For now, that single sliver of ribbon, green, torn, marked with the faintest stain, hung on iron, catching every small light, and those who passed by could not help but glance. The night song still lingered in the hedges, but it was a different melody now, one threaded with absence. And in the hush, the reader already knows what the manor does not yet allow itself to speak aloud. The world they had loved was no longer safe, and the cost of that love would be written in the next dawn. To be continued. The circle has danced in firelight, whispered secrets under the stars, and tasted the sweetness of passion beside river and forest. Yet now shadows creep closer. The laughter of the village is touched by unease, and behind the music of love, something darker begins to stir. In the next chapters, desire and danger will weave tighter together. A bold maiden will face temptation that could shatter her soul. Friendships will be tested under the weight of secrets, and the night itself will reveal claws sharp enough to tear through the veil of glamour. The very feasts and parties that once shimmered with beauty may soon turn into traps of blood and betrayal. Will the circle of lovers stay bound by passion, or will the curse of the forest claim one of their own? Can the fire of desire stand against the chill of evil? Stay tuned. The romance deepens, the danger sharpens, and the next act will take you deeper into the heart of seduction and horror. Don't miss what's coming next in this Gothic tale. Like, comment, and subscribe to the Zombie Story Zone to continue the journey. Zombie romance, Gothic horror, love and darkness, the Zombie Story Zone.
It's low. Every story's a thrill. Come and let your courage show. Fight or flight will unite as the horror unfolds in the Zombie Story Zone. Adventure never grows old. Welcome to the Zombie Story Zone, where the tales of the undead are widely known. Join the hunt, uncover the fight in the Zombie Story Zone. We'll survive the night. Grit and laughter, it's a crazy mix. With every twist and turn, we'll learn some new tricks. So grab your friends, let's dive right in the Zombie Story Zone. Let the fun begin. Grit and laughter, it's a crazy mix. With every twist and turn, we'll learn new tricks. So grab your friends, let's dive right in the Zombie Story Zone. Let the fun begin. Grit and laughter, it's a crazy mix. With every twist and turn, we'll learn some new tricks. So grab your friends, let's dive right in the Zombie Story Zone. Let the fun begin. Grit and laughter, it's a crazy mix.